Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. I really need to speak to you all from the heart. I'm going to be doing that with God's help in a moment. Let's light up the darkness. That was Shlomo Carlebach himself from a performance, I believe, in 1967 in France. Le Manachai V'Re'ah, for the sake of my brothers, I will speak, I will sing for the sake of peace. Very emotional. I can't be silent about this. This is not a political page. We rarely talk about any kinds of politics. Really, the only thing that comes up is when we feel that Jews in the world are threatened, particularly in Israel. And we will always speak on behalf of the protection of our brothers and sisters everywhere. But especially we're such a small tribe and it's a family. And when a Jew is killed anywhere in the world, we feel it. So there was the recent war, and you weren't hearing from us every day about Israel. We're not a political page, and we don't want our politics to get in the way of sharing Torah every day. But here in my neighborhood, we've been under threat. Here in my neighborhood, Jews have been attacked. And last night, after our class was over, I found out that at the end of Shabbos, toward the end of Shabbos, 2 blocks from my house, a mother and her 11-year-old boy and her 14-year-old boy were walking down the street, and a car drove by and shouted awful Jew-hating words, and then shot the 11-year-old boy with a paintball gun. Now, if you've ever played paintball, you know, of course it's not lethal, but the paintball projectile hits you so hard that usually when people do paintball fights, they wear, good thick coveralls, and still you get a welt on your skin. Now, if you're an 11-year-old boy who wasn't anticipating that he was going to be hit, he wasn't playing a game, he was walking down the street with his mother and his brother, and got nailed right here, right above the heart, leaving a terrible welt and a terrified boy and a terrified family and an angry neighborhood. Now, this is the week of Torah portion Shelach, as in Shelach Lecha. In this week's Torah portion, which we started reading yesterday afternoon on Shabbos, and we'll read it all this week, and then we'll read the whole portion on Shabbat morning in synagogue. And this Torah portion begins, this is the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, chapter 13, verse 1. The Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, "Send for yourself men and let them explore the land that I'm giving you and that you are going to enter, the land of Israel." Now it says, "Shlach lecha." This might ring a bell when Abraham was told to leave the land that he was born in and to go to a land that the Lord will show him, the land of Israel. God said to Abraham, "Lech lecha." Not just go to a land, but go yourself. Go for yourself. Some would say go to yourself. It's this reflexive lecha. Shlach is go. Lecha is and you be going, and yourself be going. Go for yourself. Go to yourself. There's a lot of beautiful spiritual teachings about when you leave the place of your home, you learn so much about yourself. It's like by leaving where you were born, you learn, you journey into yourself and discover your soul. Beautiful spiritual teachings. Now, when the children of Israel were about to enter the land of Israel, the promised land that God said, "I will take you out of Egypt and I will bring you to a land of milk and honey." Now, that wasn't something those people read in a book. Those people, the children of Israel in the wilderness, came out of Egypt thanks to 10 miracles. Then the sea parted, and then God's self, revealed God's self on Mount Sinai in an unmistakable manifestation. And people knew that God was speaking to them. And God said, I am bringing you to a good land. When it was getting time to leave the desert and enter that land, they lost faith. They became afraid. They said, and Moses confirms this in the 5th book of the Torah, in Deuteronomy, when he talks about this incident, and he says, you came to me and asked me to send spies into the land. And that's why here God doesn't say send, right? Send spies ahead, send scouts, if you will, to go in and look at the land and how you're going to take it over. Rather, the people said, well, this land that we're about to go into, what is it like? Let's get a report so we hear more about it. Wasn't good enough that God had told them it was a good land. They send these 12 princes, leaders of tribes, into the land. They return with their report. 10 of them say, well, it's beautiful, but it's inhabited by giants, and we were grasshoppers in their eyes, like you know how other people see you, and therefore we were grasshoppers in our own eyes. 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, said, what are you guys talking about? It's a beautiful land that God has promised us. Let's go. I mean, he brought us out of Egypt. He brought us across the Red Sea. He's got us in a hot, sizzling hot desert under clouds of glory that keep us cool, giving us manna that tastes like the best food anybody ever ate, every day, constantly. Excuse me. Obviously, if God says he's going to give us this land and it's beautiful, this is a happy day. Awesome. But the other 10 are like, oh yeah, no, it's beautiful. But the people who live there, they're really big, they're really strong, they're really entrenched. We're just a tiny people. How are we going to do this? And the people who hear these 2 stories, these 2 competing narratives, we're a tiny people, we can't go in there, it's not for us, we're screwed, we're going to die in the desert. Or God's taken care of us so far. God's given us all the tools we need. God said we're going to get that land, and let's go. Those are the 2 competing narratives. Which did the population run with? Fear and doubt. They were ready to believe a slander about themselves rather than hold by empirical evidence that they had seen with their own eyes. It didn't take faith to have confidence that they could enter, that God would keep giving what he had given them already and promised to give them. That didn't even take faith. That was common sense. But fear and doubt trumps faith in yourself. Fear and doubt, that a slander about yourself falls to the side rather than believe what their gut had to tell them. Let's go. Now, there are 2 competing narratives today about the land of Israel. One narrative is, against all odds, the Jews have survived for 3,000 years, even though in every generation they rose up to destroy us. We've had a dream to return to our homeland, which some Jews have always lived in, and we've never left. And there's, miles and miles and miles of archaeological, literary, and historical evidence that the Jews have been connected to this place. Everything that you and I are reading today about the Yom Kippur service in the Holy Temple is beyond debate. It happened. We had high priests serving in the temple thousands of years ago. Of course, we were there, and we have been for thousands of years. And we were pushed out during a Roman occupation and a Roman war. And eventually the Romans fell to the Ottoman Empire, essentially. And the Ottoman Empire held that land for a long time. And then the British Empire took it over. And then finally, in the 20th century, it was possible to establish a toehold for the Jews in an area surrounded by 23 Muslim nations and 500 million Muslims who have, like hundreds and hundreds as many square miles, maybe thousands more square miles than this little sliver of Israel. And we said, and the world agreed, let the Jews have this little sliver, smaller than New Jersey, in the midst of 23 nations, that can have, Arabs living freely with all the rights that Arabs have in Arab lands. That's one narrative. And then as soon as Israel made its country and started to try to live there, the 5 nations around it went to war with it, tried to destroy it, and against all odds, Israel survived. Against all odds, some would say miraculous, at any rate, still there, won the war. Now, does anyone doubt that if Israel were just left alone in its little sliver of land, that they would try to expand Israel and take over the neighboring lands? Does anyone believe that that's what Israelis want? They just want to live there in peace and be left alone. It's an affront to the honor of a small group of Arabs, not the Egyptian Arabs, not the Jordanian Arabs, maybe the Syrian Arabs in the south who are hosting Hezbollah, which is, just today a report came out that the whole Hamas war from Gaza was coordinated in a war room with Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, right? And what they concocted there, which was to launch missiles from hospitals, schools, etc., where any nation that has incoming missiles like that will fight back. You will take out the missiles that are coming into your land, thousands of them, literally. You'll fire back. And if those people hide the missile launchers among civilians, and Israel even says, hey, this is another report that came out, an actual tape recording, you can Google it and hear it. The Israelis call up and say, we're going to bomb that building because there's a launch site there. We're going to bomb it in 1 hour. Get everybody out. We're not getting out. Brother, get them out or you're going to die. We want to die. Why would you want to die? Why would you want to say that? Children are going to die. We want to die because it shows how cruel you are. And then they do. And then they get the head count that they need. Hundreds of civilians killed, put in the way of death by their leadership, Hamas, who then receives worldwide aid, tremendous amounts of money, which the leadership takes half of it for themselves. It's a corrupt gangster organization. And the rest of it is the most far-reaching propaganda campaign ever leveled at the Jewish people, ever. It is so successful that people throughout the world, in hundreds of nations, so many people are repeating what they read in the press, that the Israelis are an apartheid, oppressive nation bent on killing women and children, and they should be eradicated. There should be no Israel so that these deaths won't happen. Now, that's the fear and doubt narrative, which is being picked up, which is being proposed not just by our enemies, right, in that beautiful war room that they're jumping for joy at how successful their slander campaign against the Jews is. Wow, it's being picked up all over the world, but not only by the enemies of the Jews, by the Jews themselves. So many Jews. Just like the children of Israel in the wilderness, so many Jews today are buying right into the Hamas narrative that Israel is the oppressor. It is a delusion that just belies credibility. It's amazing that anybody will believe it, but it's the same belief system as the children of Israel outside the promised land believing the slander of the spies. We are grasshoppers. We are small. We are wicked. We are evil. We are wrong. And every Jew who criticizes his own people is bigger than his people, is smarter than his people, and doesn't have to face that gnawing gut feeling deep down that maybe this slander is wrong and that I'm buying into a delusion. Because if it's wrong, what else am I wrong about? What else am I wrong about that I believe because the newspapers tell me? What else am I wrong about because I turned my back on the traditions of my tribe? What else am I wrong about? No, it's too ugly, too dark, too scary. Better to just buy into the fear, the doubt, the slander against my own people. This is where so many of our brothers and sisters are living, in a delusion. It's tragic. I couldn't be silent and not address this. I'm not saying I have the answer. I don't know how to reach these people. If you know people, keep sharing facts with them. But the facts that Joshua and Caleb were sharing with the children of Israel in the wilderness did not penetrate the fear, doubt, self-slander narrative of the spies. And that's why God said, you will die in the desert. You still are laboring under a slave mentality, and you won't make it to the promised land. Your children will. So maybe the answer is our children. Maybe the next generation will not buy into this self-slander. I don't know. But I had to speak up. All right. Nina is at a lecture from one of her favorite rabbis who's visiting town. Rabbi Mizrahi, and so she's not collecting questions for me. I'll scan questions and comments at the end of the class, but it's hard for me to, just suddenly while you're waiting for me to answer, read large comments, right? So what I would ask is make them short and put them in context. I won't be reading them till the end of the class, so if you have something to ask or to say, regarding such and such, and then try to make your whole point in like one sentence, maybe two, okay? All right. We are on Daf Mem Tes, page 49, here in chapter 5 of Tractate Yoma. This is the laws of Yom Kippur as practiced when the temple was standing in Jerusalem. Here in chapter 5, we're getting deeper into the day of Yom Kippur and the services, the divine service performed by the high priest. And we've been talking specifically about the service of the incense. He brings a coal pan, a special gold coal pan, into the Holy of Holies, a place only the high priest enters and only on Yom Kippur, with these burning hot coals in a coal pan, a specially dedicated coal pan for this purpose in his right hand, and a ladle, a custom-made ladle that contains exactly as much incense in the spoon of the ladle as the two hands of the high priest could hold this super fine ground incense. So he carries the ladle, which is a measure of the two handfuls of the high priest, and the coals. And he's going to walk into the Holy of Holies with that. That is what we're basically talking about. And Rav Papa in the last 2 days have raised a series of questions about, well, how, under what circumstances could this service be disqualified? Here's something else, that a further objection that comes from a Baraisa. This is raised by the Gemara, so not in any particular sage's name. But with regard, and we've been comparing the incense service to other sacrificial services performed sometimes by the high priest, sometimes by other priests. The bull of Yom Kippur, that's a sacrificial service performed by the high priest on Yom Kippur. Other animal offerings and the daily incense offering can be performed by ordinary priests. Now, with respect to any animal offering brought in the temple, with regard to the receiving, carrying, or sprinkling of the blood, right? So an animal offering is slaughtered. As the life blood comes out from the place of the slaughter, it's caught in a sacred vessel that sanctifies the blood, and then the priest has to receive. It has to be a priest who receives the blood and then conveys it to the altar and then pours it or sprinkles it on the altar. If any of those three things, the carrying, sprinkling, the receiving, the carrying, or the sprinkling of the blood, is performed by a non-priest, that animal offering is disqualified. If it's performed by a mourner, a priest who's in a state of mourning, it is disqualified. At least if he's an intense mourner, an acute mourner, meaning a priest on the first day of mourning. His close relative, just died that day. he cannot perform the service in the temple. If the priest is drunk, a drunk priest disqualifies the service. A blemished priest, if he has certain skin blemishes, something wrong with him physically, he can't perform the service that day. If any of these perform the ritual, it is disqualified. And likewise, if the priest was sitting, and likewise, if he performed one of these rituals with his left hand, when he could have performed it with his right hand. The incense is carried into the Holy of Holies with his left hand, but that's a practical matter because he needs to carry the coal pan in his right hand. With respect to services that could be performed with the right hand, if he does it with the left hand, that's going to be enough to disqualify it. Also, if he's sitting down while he's doing it, this is a conclusive refutation of Rav Shesh's opinion that we read yesterday, and that, what I just read, these categories of priests, drunk, blemished, in the first day of mourning, sitting, using the left hand, blemished, all of that will disqualify the service of an animal offering. We skip down a little further. The Gemara returns to the issue of appropriate methods for taking handfuls of incense. Rav Papa raised a dilemma. What is the halacha, the law, with regard to a case where another priest scooped and placed the incense into the hands of the high priest? Right, the first part of taking the actual incense itself, they bring out a container of incense, the super finely ground incense. They bring it out to the high priest on Yom Kippur. He takes the scoop with his hands and puts it in the ladle that he'll use to carry it into the Holy of Holies. So now Rav Papa is asking, well, what if another priest does the scooping and puts it into the ladle for the high priest? Does that disqualify the service, or will the service remain valid? We know that that's not the right way to do it, but if it was done that way, is the service disqualified? The Gemara clarifies the two sides of this question. Right? We're not just going to right to the answer. First, let's understand the question. Do we require his full hands? And that is fulfilled here. His full hands, meaning his hands full, right? That's a line in the Torah. And that is fulfilled here, as in practice, the high priest has a handful of incense, right? He's taking 2 handfuls of incense. It just wasn't measured by his own hands. So does the fact that he has to take handsfuls of incense into the Holy of Holies, is that satisfied if another priest scoops it for him? Or perhaps we require that the high priest must fulfill the commandment, Leviticus 16:12, and he shall take and he shall bring. And that is not the case here, as the high priest did not scoop and take the incense himself. What's the answer? We don't know. The Gemara says, Teku, let it stand. They don't answer this question. New question. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi raised a dilemma. If the high priest scooped the incense, and then he died, what is the law with regard to the possibility that another high priest may replace him and enter with his handful? Now, this is almost the same question. The previous question was, if another priest did the scooping and put it in the ladle for the high priest, can the high priest bring it in and the service is okay? We didn't get an answer. But now Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, okay, well, what if the high priest did the scooping for himself, intending to do it for himself, but then he died? So they have to bring in the deputy high priest, the one who's appointed to step in case the high priest dies. That's why they have a backup high priest on Yom Kippur. So the fact that the high priest already scooped, does the fact that he dies, does the new high priest have to start over, or does he just step in right where the part where the high priest was in the choreography of the day? May the second priest enter the Holy of Holies with the incense that the first priest scooped, or must he start from the beginning of the process? Rabbi Hanina said to his students in excitement, come and see that sages from a later generation were able to ask a difficult question on par with the questions of the earlier generations. Even I, Rabbi Hanina, asked this same question, which was posed by my elder, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. Okay, so Rabbi Hanina is excited that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi has asked this question. If the high priest dies, does the new priest pick it up where he left off or start over because he has to make his own scooping. Now, who is Rabbi Hanina? This is Rabbi Hanina ben Chama. He was born in the Babylonian Jewish community in Babel. He emigrated to the land of Israel at a young age and became a student of Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who is the editor of the Mishna. So that the rabbis of the Mishna are called, each is called a Tana, or plural, the Tanaim. So Hanina was basically a Tana, but he overlapped with the Amoraim. Okay, so he would then teach, other Tanaim, and he would know, because he had a very long life, Amoraim, the rabbis of the Gemara, the rabbis of the Talmud. The next few generations of rabbis are called the Amoraim. And an Amora is like a speaker, somebody who repeats loudly what was said before. But Rabbi Hanina is saying, wait a minute, no, the later generations, or at least even though we're still, he's talking about Yehoshua ben Levi, is like a colleague student of his. But he's saying, okay, but even now we're later than the generations like of Rabbi Akiva, and those earlier generations, Rabbi Eliezer, etc. But now a few generations later, we still have beautiful, brilliant sages who ask amazing questions on a level with the questions asked by the earlier sages. Now, the Gemara analyzes this comment of Rabbi Hanina. Now, Rabbi Hanina just said that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is his elder. But actually, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi was a student of Rabbi Hanina. Is that to say that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi was older than Rabbi Hanina, which is why Rabbi Hanina referred to him as an early sage? But didn't Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi say himself, Rabbi Hanina permitted me to drink juice made from cress, the vegetable cress, on Shabbos for medicinal purposes? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's deference to Rabbi Hanina shows that Rabbi Hanina was older than him, was his elder. He had to seek permission. He had to he got a permit to do this thing on Shabbos from Rabbi Hanina. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is saying, wait, Hanina is my elder. Why is Hanina saying Yehoshua ben Levi is my elder? What is it? How does this work? Since it has been raised, the Gemara addresses the issue of cress juice on Shabbos. So before we understand who is whose elder, let's see how this came up. And this will actually help us understand the relationship between Hanina and Yehoshua ben Levi. So did Rabbi Hanina permit Yehoshua ben Levi to drink cress juice? It is obvious that it is permitted to drink this juice. Why would it be prohibited? You can drink any kind of vegetable juice on Shabbos. As we learned in a Mishnah, all types of food that healthy people eat may be eaten by people even for medicinal purposes, and one may likewise drink all drinks for medicinal purposes. The fact that, the issue here is that you can't give medicine on Shabbos. Now, wait, what? What do you mean you can't take medicine on Shabbos? In the old days, when you gave somebody medication, very likely you were grinding some herbs right then and there to prepare the medication, and you can't grind on Shabbos. Now, if the illness that you're treating is life-threatening, even remotely, possibly life-threatening, go ahead, grind away, give the person whatever medicine they need. We violate Shabbos to save a life, even if there's a small risk of a life being in danger. But if it's just a discomfort, so then we don't medicate on Shabbos, lest we come to violate Shabbos by grinding this medicine. And there's all kinds of exceptions to this that we discussed when we did Tractate Shabbos. However, even though a particular food or drink may have medicinal value, if anyway it's a vegetable drink that people would drink even if they weren't sick, then for sure it's permitted to eat or drink that thing on Shabbos. So why would Rabbi Hanina have to permit Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi to drink this cress juice? Rather, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's question was, is it permitted to grind and drink cress on Shabbos? And the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances? If it involves a situation where there is danger to life, and this is the prescribed cure, of course it's permitted. And if it is a case where there is no danger, well, then it is prohibited as a labor that is not necessary to violate Shabbos for. And the Gemara answers, actually, the question concerns a case where there is life-threatening danger, and this is the dilemma that was raised before Rabbi Hanina. Does this drink heal, which would mean, okay, then we violate Shabbos to give the person. But if it doesn't treat the malady, then we don't violate Shabbos. And they went to Rabbi Hanina for that question. They don't get too far in the, into the specifics of what kind of illness is treated with drinking cress juice. We're not going to, this isn't a pharmacy class right here. But the bottom line was they went to Rabbi Hanina because he had a medical expertise. And the ruling was, will this be effective? Should we violate Shabbos for a medicine that at least has a chance of effecting a cure? If there's no chance of curing the person, then why would we violate Shabbos with this? And that's what they went to Rabbi Hanina for. In any event, one can learn from this discussion that Rabbi Hanina was older than Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. Why then does Rabbi Hanina refer to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi as a member of an earlier generation, older than him, older than Hanina? Rather, we must explain that this is what he said. That Rabbi Hanina's statement should be understood like this. Their question is like the question of the early ones. In other words, Rabbi Hanina meant that this question posed by a member of a later generation is as difficult as that of the early sages. Rabbi Hanina, as a teacher, was excited that his students were so sharp, right? And that's why Yehoshua ben Levi, who's younger than Hanina, ends up being a student/colleague. Same with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Hanina merited to be a teacher to the great Rabbi Yochanan, who was the foremost teacher of his generation and the Rosh Yeshiva of the big yeshiva in the north of Israel, and his debate partner was Reish Lakish. Right, so Hanina lived for a long time and had many students, and he was thrilled when his students would ask great questions that were as sharp and incisive as the earlier sages. Now, the Gemara asks, did Rabbi Hanina actually say that this question of one high priest using the incense scooped by another was difficult to answer? But didn't Rabbi Hanina say, with this, Aaron shall come into the sacred place with a bull? And this means that the high priest must enter with the offering of a bull and not with the blood of a bull. Meaning, the high priest has to enter the Holy of Holies having already slaughtered the bull. He slaughters his bull, the bull that atones for himself, his family, and his fellow priests. Then he leaves that blood on the side. A priest, he collects it in the sacred vessel. Then he hands that vessel to an ordinary priest who just kind of swirls it, keeps it from coagulating, while he goes and takes the coal and the incense into the Holy of Holies. So he can only go to the Holy of Holies after he has slaughtered a bull. He'll go in, he'll make the incense offering, he'll come out. Later, he'll go back in there with some of that blood from the bull and sprinkle it inside the Holy of Holies. But that's on his second trip into the Holy of Holies. So what the question that's being asked is, when it says in the Torah, Leviticus 16:13, with this Aaron shall come into the sacred place with a bull. Does that mean that he has slaughtered his bull and then he can enter there? Or does it mean he has to be bringing the blood of the bull that he himself slaughtered? And that's what they're going to argue back and forth. And Hanina, so he may enter. So that's the question. And likewise, Rabbi Hanina said, if the priest scooped the incense before the slaughtering of the bull, he did nothing, right? He can't scoop the incense before he slaughters his bull. First he slaughters his bull, then he scoops the incense and goes into the Holy of Holies. That's the order. If he takes it out of order, disqualifies the offerings. Now, the Gemara explains that this is what Rabbi Hanina said. From the fact that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi raised this dilemma, it can be understood by inference that he holds the verse with the bull in this debate of, does it mean that you've already slaughtered, therefore you can go in, or does it mean you slaughtered and you're bringing in the blood of the bull that you slaughtered? In which case, if it has to be bringing in the blood of the bull that you slaughtered, then it's not going to work out that, the question we're asking is, if the high priest dies and he already scooped the incense, can the replacement high priest take that incense in with him into the Holy of Holies? But if he does that, then he would not have slaughtered his own bull, right? He would be relying on the bull that was slaughtered by the first high priest. And we don't know if that's allowed or not. That's what's being debated right here. So what halakhic conclusion was reached about this matter? Rav Papa said the resolution of this question depends on a different problem. If the high priest scoops the handful when he takes the incense from the coal pan and again scoops a handful in the Holy of Holies. Right, so Rav Papa says what this depends on is whether the replacement high priest, after the high priest dies on Yom Kippur, can he use the incense that was already scooped by the first high priest? The answer to that is going to depend on when the high priest, or in this case the replacement high priest, enters the Holy of Holies with his coal pan in his right hand and his ladle of incense in his left hand. And then he gets in there, he puts the coal pan on the floor, and then does he just take the ladle of incense, which is a measured of 2 handfuls of the original high priest, who was custom made for the size of his hands, and then just take the ladle and pour it on the coals? Or does he take the ladle of incense and put it back into his hands, and then from his hands puts it on the hot coals? He scooped it once. Does he need to scoop it again from the ladle while he's inside the Holy of Holies and put it on the hot coals? Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said to Rav Papa, if the high priest scoops and again scoops, so then another priest should not be permitted to enter with the handful, as it is impossible that the new handful will be neither less nor more than the amount of the first handful. But if you don't scoop again, if you just pour it out from the ladle onto the coals, then this thing would work, that he could take, that the replacement high priest could use the incense scooped by the first high priest, because it wouldn't matter that his handfuls are not the same as the replacement priest's handfuls, the size of his handfuls. Right? If it doesn't go from the ladle into his hands and onto the coals, if it just goes from the ladle onto the coals, it'll work. But if it has to go to his hands first, there's no way that his hands are the same hands as the priest. And so if there's this intermediate step of the replacement priest, it's going to disqualify the service. The Gemara asks, where am I? Okay. And so the Gemara explains the back, and I'm coming to the end, so if you get those questions, simple questions with a little context so I understand when I'm scanning fast, let me know. Here we go. So the Gemara explains the background to this problem. As a dilemma was raised before the sages. Does the high priest scoop a handful from the incense once and again scoop a handful a second time in the Holy of Holies, or does he not scoop a second time? The Gemara suggests, come and hear a resolution to this dilemma from the Mishna. This was the measure of the spoon. What? Is it not correct to infer from the Mishnah that just as its measure is on the outside, so is its measure on the inside? In other words, there is no need to scoop another handful, as this is its fixed measure that he pours onto the coal pan. The original high priest who scooped it out, that was his handfuls, put it in the ladle, it's done. Why would we need him to scoop it again once he's inside the Holy of Holies? Well, the Gemara says, no. This is not necessarily the correct interpretation of the Mishnah. Perhaps it means that if he wants to measure a precise amount for his handful, he may measure with a utensil for this purpose. Alternatively, it could mean that he may take neither less nor more than the measure he initially took. Consequently, there's no proof from the Mishnah that with regard to whether the high priest must scoop his second handful, yes or no. So come in here a resolution to this dilemma from a Baraisa. How should the high priest act when he's inside the Holy of Holies? When he needs to place the incense on the coals by taking a handful from the spoon and placing it in his hands, does he take it from the ladle into his hands and put it on the coals? Yes or no? Again, this question that is before us. And this Baraisa says, after he places the coal pan on the ground, he holds the front of the ladle, i.e. the spoon of incense, with his fingertips. And some say he holds it with his teeth. And at this stage, the handle of the spoon rests between his arms, and he pushes it and raises it up slowly with his thumb toward his body until it reaches between his elbows, which he then uses to turn it over. And he then returns the incense into his palms, after which he pours it from his hands into the coal pan. And he heaps the incense into a pile on the coals so that the smoke rises slowly. And some say he does the opposite, and he scatters it so that the smoke rises quickly. The point is, we can't quite picture it, but it's almost like like an instruction for a yoga pose. It's super difficult. Why? Because he's got to take a ladle which contains 2 handfuls like this of the incense. So how do you do that? You can't take the ladle and pour it into one hand because it'll spill over the sides. So how do you take a ladle that you're holding and pour all of its contents into your 2 hands if it's exactly the amount that fits in your 2 hands? And so it's a very difficult process. We're not going to understand exactly how physically he did it. The point is that it was difficult. And this taking of a handful of incense is the most difficult sacrificial rite in the temple. And the Gemara asks, this one is the hardest rite and no other? This is the most difficult thing that a priest does in the temple? But there is the pinching. This is the malika, when bird offerings are brought, like the head of the bird is pinched by the high priest, very difficult to accomplish. It's a different kind of slaughter than cows and goats and sheep. So there is the pinching, which is also considered extremely difficult. And there is the taking of a handful of the wheat flour, the meal offering, another complex rite. Rather, this taking of a handful of incense is one of the most difficult rites in the temple, rather than the single most difficult one. All right, so we're not prepared to say that it's the most difficult thing that any priest does, but it's among the most difficult, and the high priest has to get it exactly right on Yom Kippur, lest he somehow mess it up and doesn't bring an atonement for the whole nation of Israel. What does the incense atone for? Lashon hara, specifically slander. Slander against who? Slander against other Jews. Slander against ourselves. My whole, talk that I gave at the beginning of this class, I'm crying that we don't have a temple and a priest on Yom Kippur who could bring the incense offering to atone for the ways that Jews slander the Jewish people in such large numbers in this day and age. May their eyes be open. May their hearts be open. May they stop being conned by one of the biggest delusions in the history of mankind since the delusion of the sin of the spies, when the children of Israel were about to enter the promised land. Indeed, learn from this that it is so. Let's go to your questions. Like I said, Nina is at a lecture, so I will be scanning the questions and comments myself. I probably won't see all of them. It's hard for me to read and answer, so I'll do the best I can. Yehudit Sobel, Sal, I'm glad you are addressing this. However, there are so many of our holy brothers and sisters that are naive and irresponsible in their speech and actions. May their hearts be opened. Sharon Fran Brooks, the recent comments from my own state's university, Rutgers, where my own kids went to college, is terribly disturbing. Where the chancellor of the university at Rutgers spoke up one day and said, anti-Semitism is terrible, we won't stand for it. There's violence being perpetrated against Jews because of Jew hatred. And the next day, he apologized for saying that. Salsa Canedo, love and peace for the children of God, chosen and loved by the creator of the universe, anointed people to minister him. May the one who protects Israel bring peace to all. Amen. Salsa, beautifully said. Zach, I'm glad you spoke up. Paula, you spoke from your heart. Thank you. Brandon Christian Sullivan, this is a powerful speech. This needs to go viral. If you think so, maybe we'll clip that part. I wasn't looking for that, but if it can be shared and it can be effective, then yeah, by all means, maybe we'll clip it and put it out there. Okay. So a lot of support for what I've said. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate. And I'm sorry I didn't read everybody's names and cities, at the beginning of the show tonight. But I really appreciate that you're all here. Carolyn says we'll have to watch the replay. Shalom from Raleigh. Okay, so that's what I've got for us tonight. really, let us pray. Just like in every generation they rise up to destroy us, let us pray that we don't join our enemies in trying to destroy us. So many Jews are just, their hearts are so filled with a desire to be virtuous and to be good, right? They don't think they're doing wrong. They don't think they're rising up against their own people. They've just bought into the same kind of delusion as the children of Israel bought into in the episode of the Spies. So if you're not familiar with it, that's this week's Torah portion. You can always Google Torah portion Chabad, and you'll get taken right to the text of the weekly Torah portion. This Torah portion is called Shelach, and it begins with God saying, Shelach lecha, right? Saying to Moses, okay, well, the people asked you to send these spies into the land. You're doing it for yourself, not because I told you to do this. And you're going to get what you deserve because of it. It's a very important episode to understand, and to understand how Rashi comments on Shelach lecha, send for yourself, not because I, God, have told you to send. God has already told us that it is a good land, and that it was promised to us for the benefit of the whole world. So, have a good night, and with God's help, have a safe night. May everybody have a safe night. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. It's Memorial Day. So, let's just take a moment. Memorial Day here honors in America everyone who fell defending the first really and greatest beacon of liberty in world history, the American democracy, for all its many flaws. Has shown a light into the world and shown that democracy works. It can be corrupted, it can fail, it can be tested. But the American model, the American experiment, as Abraham Lincoln liked to talk about, is on behalf of all mankind. And it has elevated so many people. There's so much work still to do. But think of all these American soldiers, men and women who have died defending this ideal of liberty and freedom and equality and equal opportunity for all. We honor their memories.